Hey Quilters, while Missouri Star is celebrating the birthday of their mascot Chuck the Duck, I will be decorating this canvas tote bag from Missouri Star using this cute little Chuck template and some prints from their layer cake, Welcome to Quilt Town. So these are the prints that I'm going to be using to decorate one pocket, one side's pocket, and then just know that I do have a tutorial for a way that I use some more prints to decorate the pocket on the other side. So let's get started. So we're going to decorate this pocket using a reverse applique technique, and we're going to use our Chuck template. I've got 3 squares here. All of these squares are 10 inches. These are from a layer cake, but you can use whatever you want. And I've got right here, I have a piece of double-sided fusible web, and I like to use Heat and Bond Light. So the double-sided fusible web, you'll see there's like a shiny side and then a side that has paper on the back. So for your double-sided fusible web, you want to cut it. I've cut this one to 6 inches. So if you're using the Chuck template and layer cake squares, 6 inches is perfect. So you'll want to cut it so that you have about 1 inch clearance on all sides of whatever template you're using. And you also want to make it so that if you lay this in the center of your squares that you're going to use, that you've got at least 1 inch clearance around the fusible web here too, and that'll make more sense as we get into the tutorial. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to mark this fusible web. I'm going to write on the paper side of the fusible web. Like I said, this is Heat and Bond Light. You're going to mark, and I do have a link in the description for where you can get some Heat and Bond Light, but you're going to mark a diagonal line here and a diagonal line each way. And that's just going to help you center all this later. This paper is going to come off, so you just use whatever marking you want to, whatever kind of marker you want to here. I've just got a plain pencil. Like I said, this is just going to help us line stuff up. Okay, now that that's marked, we're going to mark our squares. So I've got 3 10-inch squares here, and what these squares are going to be used for, we'll have 1 square to be basically the background of the front of the pocket. 1 square is going to be whatever, going to be the part that makes the design of the template. And then 1 square is going to be the inside lining of the pocket. So I'm going to use this square, and it's super cute, super cute. It's got scissors and pins on it, but I'm going to use this square as the background of my pocket. So take whatever square you're going to use for the background of your pocket, and you're going to mark those diagonal lines on the wrong side of that square, just like you did with your double-sided fusible web. Now this does not have to be 100% perfect. You're just using it as a guide to help you line stuff up. All right, so now that that is marked, we're going to go back and grab our piece of fusible web, and we're going to grab our template. Like I said, I'm using Chuck. And so you'll want your template to be traced basically backwards. So for the Chuck template, you can kind of see, I'm going to zoom in here. You can see these letters, and it says Chuck template on it. So you'll want it facing so that the letters do not look right to you when you trace that. And these lines that we just made are going to be useful to help us line up our template, to kind of help us see the center. Okay, so we're just going to trace him. All right, now that he's traced, you're going to take that tracing that you just made, and you're going to use the lines that you drew on your double-sided web and line those up with these lines that you drew on the wrong side of that background part of the front of the pocket. Like I said, they don't have to be perfect. You won't see these lines in the final project. You just want to give yourself an idea for how to get that lined up nice and neatly. So once you have it lined up, you're going to go to your ironing board and you're going to run your iron over this paper side. And how long you have to do that is going to depend on how long that the instructions for your fusible interfacing says. So you're just going to run your iron over that long enough to fuse this to your fabric, and that interfacing is going to do a couple things for you. One thing it's going to do is it's going to check the fray on this fabric when we go and cut it, and it's also going to help that hold to the square that we're using for the actual chuck design in our reverse applique. So I'm going to fuse that, and then I'll meet you back here and show you what to do next. Okay, so once you get that side fused, you're going to wait until your paper and your fabric is cool to touch, and then you're going to get some scissors and you're going to cut out the shape of your template. I'm using these spring-loaded scissors here just because the sharp point gives me a little bit more precision when I go to cut the sharp sides, like the sharp points in this design. So I'm just going to fold this over and make myself a little hole in the middle, start cutting from, and I'm just going to start cutting until I get my chuck design cut out. Okay, so once you get your design cut out, you're going to remove this paper. And the paper should peel right off, and it leaves you with another side of the interfacing that can still be fused. So you'll grab your square that you wanted to use to make the design and have that right side up, so pretty side of the fabric up, and then you'll stack that part that you're using for the background on top of it. And you want the pretty side of that one facing up as well. And you're just going to match those up. So you'll just have them stacked on top of each other. Match them up as best you can. And once you're done with that, you can just iron this from the top, so that this side of the interfacing that can still be fused fuses to this piece that you're using for your background. Okay, so now that we've got that fused, you can see it's fused here, but I don't have it stuck together here, and that's because when I sew this pocket onto the bag, I don't want that interfacing showing up in this big seam allowances that I'm going to use, but it will hold it still for you so that you can now go and applique around the edges of our little chuck cut out here however you want to. Lots of ways you can do that. You can go to the machine and do whatever decorative stitch you want, or just do a simple straight stitch around the edge, however you want to do that. I'm actually going to do a hand stitch just because I feel like I don't do a lot of hand stitching, but I feel like that might actually be easier for me to be precise about stitching as opposed to if I use the machine, just because using the machine would be so slow and precise. But you can applique that down however you want to. You can also, if you wanted to, quilt this to hold it down. One thing though, I know it's really tempting to use like a stronger adhesive, like maybe Heat and Bond Ultra, just to hold that down really well. But just know that if you do that, you can't stitch this down because it's just going to be so thick. It's going to be really hard for you, even if you use your machine, to try to stitch through this interfacing if you use Heat & Bond Ultra. So I'm going to stitch this by hand, and I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so now we're going to hand stitch around the edges here. I'm going to go about 1/8 inch away from the edge of that design. I've got some pearl cotton embroidery floss here that is from Missouri Star. This is green grapes. And the embroidery floss can be broken off into strands, but I'm just going to use the whole strand just because I want it nice and thick so that you can see it well. And I've chosen this color just because it contrasts nicely with my background color. So you're going to thread your needle, and you can use any needle. This is a specifically embroidery needle, but you can use any needle. You just want to have a nice big eye just so that it's easier for you to thread it. And you're going to pull it down. I've gotten myself maybe 2 or 3 inches extra here. And then I'm actually going to tie the back off. So tie off this end of the thread here. And what I do, you're just going to wrap it around your finger and then pinch in between there and then roll your finger backwards, and that'll give you a nice little tie off. So I'm going to start with that. If you have a hoop and you want to use a hoop, you can. So we're just going to start stitching. And you see I'm starting between 1/8 inch and 1/4 inch, and I'm just going to try to stay consistent as far as how far I'm away from the edges throughout. And if you don't do a lot of hand stitching like I don't, it's okay to go slow and just kind of take your time with it and make it a fun project, a nice relaxing project. And you can make those stitches as big or small as you want to. And this is why if you're stitching this down, you really don't want to use an ultra hold like Heat & Bond Ultra, because this would be really hard to sew down if you did that. And you know, if your stitches aren't exactly the same length or perfect, I mean, that's kind of the nice thing about handmade. I mean, the hand stitched, we want this to look hand stitched because we took the time to hand stitch it. So I will meet you back here once I have this whole thing stitched, and I'll show you. I like to tie these stitches off at the end when I'm done, and I'll show you how I do that when I meet you back. Okay, now that I finished hand stitching this, you can see this nice chunky top stitch around Chuck. I'm going to show you how to tie this off. So first, let's look at this ugly knot I made. If you were quilting this, you wouldn't want that ugly knot, but for this particular thing, there's going to be an inside lining of the pocket, so you won't see that knot anyway, so it's not a big deal here. So now all we need to do is just tie off this thread tail. So what you're going to do, let me get here close here, you're going to put your needle underneath this stitch, this last stitch you did before you finished, and get this untangled a little bit. So you'll pull that down, and when you're almost finished, you're going to put your needle through that loop, and then you'll finish making that stitch. And that's going to make an extra stitch that you'll only see from the back. And you're going to do that same thing again, except for this time you're going to go through that extra stitch that you just made. So put our needle through here and pull that down until you have just a little loop left, and then put your needle through that. You pull it tight, you'll have a little knot right there. If you want to, you can do it again. It's up to you. And then when you're almost finished with that stitch, put it through the loop. There you go. And you can just cut this excess off neatly, and we're ready for the next step.